Hey, Redemption St. Thomas and friends. Well, here we are, Wednesday morning, halfway through week 6 of this quarantine that we're under. Um, and I want to begin by, first of all, giving a shout out to all the frontline workers, whether it's in the hospitals, doctors and nurses, and even anyone else working within the hospitals, all the other frontline workers, whether it's the police, whether it's firefighters, or those in the food industry, all those that are out there. Thank you for serving the country and serving the country well. For those who are at home, um, you might start getting antsy and feel like your rights are being infringed upon because you're asked to stay at home. And I get it. I mean, I'd love to get out by now. But I think it'd be good for us to have a degree of perspective in this. If Let me give you an example. If you were born in 2001 and now we're in 2020, the most significant thing that you would have experienced at this point in time is what we're going through right now, this pandemic, where we're asked to stay at home until our leaders feel that it's manageable at least. But think back to if you would have been born in the year 1900, so about 120 years ago, and if God would have given you a lifespan of about 60 years, their experience would have been significantly different than what we're experiencing right now. Um, by the time you were 14 years old, World War One would have come into being. And imagine the difficulties and the strains that would have put on societies. Um, and then that lasted for 4 years or so. And right after World War One ended, then came the Spanish flu pandemic. And from what I understand and the little that I know about it, it seemed significantly worse than what we're experiencing at this point in time, or at least the devastation that it brought on. And so here you are. By the time you've come to be about 20 years old, you've experienced a world war, you've experienced a pandemic like the Spanish flu, but it's not over yet. And then come the 1930s, and here now you experience the Great Depression. Now, we often hear about the impact of the Great Depression to our neighbors or from our neighbors in the United States. But interestingly enough, at least Wikipedia, regardless of how accurate it is or not, at least it states there that Canada was actually worse hit by the Great Depression than even Britain and the US. And so you would have lived through an incredibly difficult time in that season. And I'm sure the governments put measures in place at that time. But it didn't end there. After the Great Depression, several years later, now here comes World War II and all the devastation that would have brought with it and the impact. And so you would have lived a life by the time you were 45, 50 years old, and you would have lived through World War One, the Spanish flu pandemic, World War II, the Great Depression, and then World War II. And so that brings a very different perspective. And I'm sure the governments must have put on all kinds of different measures in place for the safeguarding of the people at that time. And so you may feel right now that your rights are being infringed upon, but I don't believe for a moment that our governments are trying to enforce a dictatorial sort of tyranny upon the people, where they take away our privileges and our rights simply because they ask us to stay home for 10 to 12 weeks or whatever it may be. I may be proven to be wrong, and that's a possibility, but I just don't see that as being the case here. But what's required actually from us in this season as Christians? Well, at Redemption, we have 4 pillars, and today I just want to touch on the 4th pillar. And our 4th pillar is unafraid witness, or also known as courageous evangelism. That's another one of the pillars that we hold to, and I believe is extremely relevant, particularly in this season of life. And so it's easy for us at this time to get swayed and pulled into all the stuff that's being fed to us online about how the governments are trying to do wrong by taking away rights and so forth. But even if that were the case, how should we respond? And one of the ways we ought to respond, and one of the pillars that we hold to, is that we're actually called to be an unafraid witness of the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? As Christians, this is the mission you've been called to. And there is no more relevant time in this season right now, or nothing, I think, more pressing in this time for us to do than to be an unafraid witness, right? Listen, the rest of the world is going to continue to ring the bells of what the government may be doing wrong, about the rights that are being infringed upon and so forth. And there's a lot of false truth, and that's something that we've gotten used to hearing now over the last number of years, isn't it? But it's true. There's a lot of stuff out there that's not accurate, that's not true. And you can either become overwhelmed with that, and you can get swept away with that and become, the sounding brass for those things. But I would encourage you to say, we got something better or more important that we're called to. Yes, even than our freedoms in this country, there is a greater call that we have upon us in this season. And that is that we are to be an unafraid witness of the gospel of Jesus Christ. We are to be a bold and courageous witness for the gospel to the people in our community. Listen, when we look back in Acts chapter 4, persecution has come upon the church. Jesus has already ascended back to heaven. The church has grown significantly in Jerusalem. And a guy by the name of Paul even begins to persecute the church. And then when we get to Acts chapter 8, and in fact, this is where we really start pulling into the story of Saul, later to be known as Paul, as persecution breaks out against the church. Here's what we read. Listen to this. I think this is really interesting, very telling for us. Acts chapter 8, verse 4. And it says this: "Now those who were scattered went about preaching the word." Okay, real quickly here. They're being scattered because of persecution. They're fleeing for their lives. Their goal, their hope is to be free and not to end up in prison, not to end up being persecuted or put to death. Excuse me. But here's what I find incredibly interesting. As they're being scattered, what they're doing is they're preaching the gospel. Notice that everyone knows that persecution is happening. They don't need to share the fact that that's going on and that's why they're actually fleeing and being scattered. But what's left behind as they're going on, as they're scattering, the taste that they're leaving behind is not that their rights are being infringed upon and that their privileges are being taken away. What's being left behind is the fact that they're preaching the gospel. So when these people left, as they're being scattered, and the people that weren't Christians that are going, wow, having come in contact with these people, as these people scattered, the thing that remained with them was the fact that they were preaching the gospel. That's what was being left behind. And I think that's what we're called to in this season. Man, what an opportunity to be a witness for the gospel. And we still have the legal rights and the freedoms to do that, right? Some things are being clamped down upon when it comes to social media. But I still have the liberty right now online to share the gospel. I have the liberty to share the gospel with my neighbors. I have the liberty to witness to anyone about Jesus Christ and the gospel. And because here's the thing, folks. When we actually go through the scriptures, we actually don't ever see the church or Christians fighting for political rights. I'm not saying there isn't a time and a place for it. I believe God will use Christians in certain offices and areas to do that. But for the church, our mission is not political in a sense. Our mission is for the kingdom of God. This world is not our home. Our home is in the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom that is to come, right? And so right now, the way to bring about change is by preaching the gospel. I think one of the things, and I really appreciate the words of the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, I believe it is, and in verse 2, and I don't mean to rip this out of its context and use it unwisely or incorrectly, but in 1 Corinthians 2:2, Paul writes, he says, "For I've decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified." And just laying the context aside for the moment in which Paul was dealing with as his character was being attacked, his apostleship was being attacked, and so forth, he didn't come across as being a smart aleck, right? He came across going, "Look, I came to you knowing nothing except Jesus Christ and him crucified." Hey, brothers and sisters in Christ, if you are a Christian in this season right now, what you are called to is to make known Jesus Christ. That is what we're called to. That is what the world needs to hear. You want to bring change? Preach the gospel. That brings permanent change more than any legislation could. And so this is what we're called to. And I want to encourage you to do the same thing. Preach the gospel. That's what brings change. Be a witness for Jesus Christ in this season. Show the people around us how God is sufficient in this season of life to bring us through this, right? We can trust in him. We can count upon him, and he'll never leave us nor let us go in spite of what we may endure for a season. And it is for a season, right? And our hope is not in this life. Our hope is in Jesus Christ and his kingdom that is to come. And so, folks, let me just be an encouragement to you that way. Hey, listen, this is why, being an unafraid witness is one of our pillars, right? This is our season right now to be an unafraid witness, to be a bold witness for the gospel of Jesus Christ. Listen, folks, we're praying for you. We love you. We miss you, but we recognize this is for a season. Let us show that we are a peculiar people as Christians, that we are the people of God, and that we are here in this season to serve and to proclaim the good news. I hope you find yourself growing and being encouraged in your faith. I hope you find Jesus to be sufficient in this season. And I hope that you can see this as a season in which we get to proclaim the good news, that we can be a light in the darkness that people are sensing in this scenario. Hey, God bless you. We love you. We miss you and look forward to getting to you soon. Bye-bye.